Zadie Smith's debut novel, White Teeth, 2000, is a vibrant and multi-layered exploration of identity, multiculturalism, and the complexities of family dynamics. Set in contemporary London, the novel examines the intertwined lives of two families, the Iqbals and the Joneses, across multiple generations. Through a diverse and often fragmented narrative structure, Smith explores themes of assimilation, cultural identity, the generational divide, and the interplay between science, religion, and culture. While White Teeth has been lauded for its exploration of British multiculturalism, there are deeper, lesser-known psychological undercurrents and thematic complexities that make it a richly layered text. This essay will delve into the lesser-known themes and psychological insights within White Teeth, focusing on identity formation, the exploration of fate and agency, the role of science and religion, and the psychological consequences of generational trauma and cultural inheritance. At the heart of White Teeth is the question of identity, how it is formed, how it shifts, and how it is both chosen and imposed. The novel's central characters, Archie Jones, Samad Iqbal, their families, and their descendants, grapple with their individual and collective identities as they navigate the complexities of being immigrants or descendants of immigrants in modern London. However, Smith subtly critiques the idea of a fixed or singular identity, suggesting instead that identity is fluid, fragmented, and subject to multiple influences. One of the lesser explored aspects of the novel's treatment of identity is the psychological impact of cultural inheritance and the pressure of living up to the expectations imposed by both the past and society. This theme is particularly pronounced in the character of Millat Iqbal, Samad's son. Millat is torn between his parents' conservative Muslim expectations and the allure of Western culture. His psychological conflict between his father's strict religious beliefs and his own desire to assimilate into the secular British society reflects the internal tension many children of immigrants face. The desire to be part of a larger national identity while also acknowledging the weight of their cultural heritage. Millat's identity crisis leads him to extremes, as he joins a radical Muslim group in a desperate attempt to carve out a sense of self in a world that seems to both reject and demand him. Millat's struggle with identity is mirrored in the character of his twin sister, Irie. Whereas Millat is consumed by the need to belong to a singular identity, Irie represents a more fluid, multidimensional sense of self. Irie's journey is one of personal transformation, from self-loathing and insecurity about her body and heritage to the recognition of her own power to define who she is. Irie's struggle with her Jamaican and English roots speaks to the novel's broader theme that identity is not only shaped by external forces, but is also self-determined, influenced by individual choice and self-reflection. The novel presents a nuanced view of identity as a complex amalgamation of personal choice, familial influence, historical legacy, and social context. A recurring theme in White Teeth is the tension between fate and agency. How much control do individuals have over their lives, and how much is determined by the forces of history, family, and culture? Smith deftly examines how the past, both personal and collective, shapes individual behavior and decisions, often in ways that are unconscious or beyond one's control. Samad Iqbal, Millat and Irie's father, represents the psychological burden of the past. His experiences as an immigrant from Bangladesh to England haunt him throughout the novel. His decision to marry his wife, Alsana, is driven by a deep sense of duty to his cultural and familial heritage, but is also marked by the unresolved traumas of colonialism and displacement. Samad's inability to reconcile his longing for his homeland with his reality in London forces him to impose rigid cultural and religious expectations on his children, especially Millat. This inability to break free from the past creates psychological strife for Samad, as he tries to force his children into molds that reflect his own sense of honor and duty, all the while feeling powerless to control the direction of their lives. In a psychological sense, Samad's obsession with his children's behavior reflects the novel's broader critique of how individuals are shaped by the weight of history. While Samad may feel bound by cultural traditions, his children's sense of self is not as easily shaped by the past. Millat and Irie's psychological responses to their father's impositions suggest that the younger generation has more agency in determining their identity, though it comes with its own set of struggles. The tension between Samad's overwhelming desire to pass on his cultural heritage and Millat and Irie's need to assert their individuality reveals the limits of familial control and the generational clash over fate and agency. This theme is further explored through the character of Archie Jones, whose life is marked by an overwhelming sense of randomness and a lack of control. Archie's suicidal thoughts at the beginning of the novel and his subsequent resurrection, both literal and metaphorical, demonstrate a central tension between fate and free will. His life seems governed by forces beyond his control, and yet, over time, he begins to reclaim some agency by taking on the responsibility of helping others, particularly in his later relationship with Irie. Archie's search for meaning, in a world that often feels arbitrary, suggests a more optimistic view of agency, that while the past may inform the present, individuals have the power to shape their own futures. Another psychological undercurrent of White Teeth is the interaction between science and religion, and the ways in which both systems of belief influence personal and cultural identities. The Iqbal family's experiences with faith and scientific rationalism are central to the narrative and offer a layered examination of the ways in which these systems shape human behavior and self-perception. Samad Iqbal's relationship with religion is fraught with psychological tension. As a devout Muslim, he is committed to the traditional values of Islam, but his belief system is complicated by his experiences of colonialism, immigration, and the disillusionment he feels in Britain. Samad's strict adherence to his faith leads him to impose an inflexible sense of discipline on his children, particularly Millat. However, his own moral and spiritual life is marked by hypocrisy. He engages in an affair and becomes involved in morally questionable behavior, all while attempting to instill a sense of religious duty in his children. This hypocrisy reveals the psychological consequences of living in conflict with one's beliefs. Samad's inability to reconcile his personal desires with his public persona creates a deep psychological rift, one that is passed down to his children. In contrast to Samad's religious devotion is the character of Archie's friend, Dr. Nathan Bogle, a scientist who represents the rationalist worldview that is deeply skeptical of religion. Nathan's approach to life, rooted in scientific inquiry, is emblematic of the secular worldview that informs much of the British cultural landscape in the post-colonial era. While Samad's children wrestle with the psychological demands of cultural and religious identity, Nathan's philosophy offers an alternative but equally limiting perspective, one that dismisses the emotional and spiritual aspects of human experience. In this way, Smith critiques the rigidity of both religious and scientific ideologies, suggesting that both can be limiting forces in the search for self-knowledge. The novel's treatment of science and religion is particularly significant in its exploration of cultural assimilation and the hybrid identities of the characters. The characters' engagements with these systems of thought reflect their struggles to find a balance between competing cultural and personal forces. While Samad clings to religion as a source of moral authority, Archie and his peers are drawn to secularism, often as a form of escape from the emotional and spiritual crises that arise from their immigrant identities. The psychological conflict here is not just intellectual. It is deeply tied to the characters' experiences of displacement and their search for meaning in a complex, multicultural society. A lesser-known but profoundly important theme in White Teeth is the psychological inheritance of trauma across generations. The psychological consequences of colonialism, migration, and cultural displacement are felt not just in the lives of the immigrants, but also in their children. Smith illustrates the ways in which these inherited traumas manifest as identity crises, emotional turmoil, and the perpetuation of cultural and familial expectations. Samad Iqbal's life is shaped by the psychological scars of colonialism. Having grown up in a British-controlled India, Samad carries with him the wounds of displacement, humiliation, and a yearning for a lost sense of dignity. His migration to Britain after independence is motivated not only by economic opportunity, but by a desire to escape the psychological weight of his past. However, rather than freeing him, his experience of migration exacerbates his identity crisis. The trauma of colonization becomes internalized, manifesting as an obsessive need to control his family and force them into a mold of his own creation, rooted in his memory of what it means to be honorable and manly. This generational trauma affects his children, particularly Millat. Millat's radicalization can be understood in part as a reaction to the psychological pressures of being caught between two worlds, the conservative world of his father and the Western secular world of his peers. His search for belonging and meaning is driven by a sense of displacement and cultural confusion, a theme that resonates with many second-generation immigrants who feel caught between the values of their parents and the culture of the country in which they were raised. Irie, too, grapples with her cultural inheritance. Her sense of shame and insecurity about her body, her mixed-race identity, and her place in the world are manifestations of the psychological burdens passed down by both her Jamaican heritage and her family's experiences in England. Yet, unlike Millat, Irie embarks on a journey of self-empowerment, finding ways to embrace and redefine her identity on her own terms. White Teeth is a novel rich in psychological insights and thematic complexity. Zadie Smith's exploration of identity, generational trauma, cultural inheritance, and the intersection of science and religion reveals the psychological undercurrents that shape the characters' lives. The novel critiques the pressures of assimilation and the fragmentation of identity in a multicultural society, while offering nuanced portrayals of the personal struggles that arise from these broader societal conflicts. Through its vivid characters, intricate narrative structure, and psychological depth, White Teeth presents a compelling meditation on the complexity of selfhood and the psychological challenges of navigating the intersections of culture, family, and history.